A pleasure to be here. What I want to do today is simply share with you my story of how my family and I took dirt and made it into soil. And then what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the current production model, farming and ranching today. And then I'd like to end it kind of on how we can change things and how it's up to each one of us to make a difference, not only in our own lives, for us and our families, but in our communities also, and how we can actually make Earth the kingdom of God. And that's what I plan on talking about today, and then at any time I'm open for questions, and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So a number of years ago, I had a publishing company come to me and want to know if I'd be interested in writing a book about the journey my family and I have been on. And I really didn't have a desire to write, but they talked me into it, and so I did write this book on dirt to soil, and it rather amazes me the reception that it's seen. It's been the #1 selling agricultural book on Amazon since it was released 27 months ago. So for quite a while, and it's now being translated in 7 different foreign languages. So I'm pleased at the impact that it's had, and every day I have the good fortune I'll get between 200 and 400 emails and phone calls every day from people around the world talking to me about regenerative agriculture and how to get into it. So this is a picture from my ranch. My ranch is actually located mostly in the jurisdiction of the city of Bismarck. We farm about 6,000 acres, part owned, part rented. And we're kind of getting surrounded by city. But the beautiful thing is that no matter where you're located, you can, through your management, change your farm, your ranch, your city lot, whatever the case may be, to be whatever you'd like it to be. So I didn't grow up on a farm. I grew up in the city of Bismarck. My dad worked for the Rural Electric Co-op. My mother had her hands full raising 4 boys in the city of Bismarck. But I took an interest at an early age. I took a vocational agriculture course, and I was just infatuated with agriculture. And I knew that's what I wanted to do, so I actually came to NDSU to be a vocational agriculture teacher. But I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, and that's the farm we're on today. I tell everyone her father had 3 girls and no boys, so he was stuck with me. And so I learned how to farm from my father-in-law. That's my father-in-law and his beloved disc. He loved to till. I remember him teaching me back in the mid-'80s, and he said, "Gabe, you'll learn the more you till the soil, the better it is." And now I look back and realize just how wrong this is. But I thank him for giving me the start and giving me the opportunity to farm and ranch. It wasn't very many years, though, that I came to the realization that through my management, I was actually degrading the resource. And I would watch those heavy winds blow soil, and Mike and I were talking about it here beforehand, how when it gets dry and you see tilled fields, you see that soil blowing away. And I realized early on that I needed to change. So in 1994, I sold all my tillage equipment, and I went 100% no-till. I sold the tillage equipment to be able to buy that no-till drill. So all the land we have today has been zero-tilled since 1994, including our garden, and I'll talk more about that coming up. 1995 came along, and the day before I was going to start combining 1,200 acres of spring wheat, I lost the entire crop to a hailstorm. Well, that's pretty devastating for a young family starting out. I didn't have any hail insurance. My father-in-law had farmed there for 35 years and only had hail a couple of times, just in small amounts. But this wiped me out, so wasn't able to pay the bank back. I was fortunate that we scraped together enough money to make interest payments, but I couldn't pay him back the principal. 1996 came along, and I lost 100% of our crop to hail again. So by then, things are getting real tough, and my wife and I took off-farm jobs in order to put food on the table, and I say to keep the banker at bay. 1997 came along, and it was a very dry year in central North Dakota, and we never combined an acre. So that's 3 years of no crop, and by then, I have to be honest, I was questioning my choice of careers, and my wife was questioning her choice of husbands, But one thing, those who know me that know that I just don't take no for an answer. I'm going to figure it out one way or another. So I started to observe, started to learn. 1998 came along, and that's an actual photograph that I took that day, and you can guess what that led to. So 4 years in a row, 4 crop failures. By then, things were really starting to look pretty tough. And I tell people that was very, very hard to live through. I don't wish that upon anybody. But it was the best thing that could have happened to me. My wife and I found ourselves $1.5 million in debt and no crop to pay the bank back. But I went out into my pastures and I prayed and I told God, if He saw me through this, I would dedicate the rest of my life to helping others. And so what I'm going to share with you now is my story on how I've tried to accomplish that. It was at that time that I heard Don Campbell, who is a rancher from Alberta, Canada, speak. And he made this statement. He said, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. I'll never forget that. That statement changed my life. I knew that, there was a reason God put me through those 4 years. And I needed to be wise enough to take the lessons that He was teaching me and learn from them. So that sent me on a journey. Now I'm going to step aside for a few minutes, and I want to talk about the current production model in agriculture, because this plays into my story. So in agriculture, you hear every day that farmers and ranchers have to feed the world. It's a challenge. We got to produce more and more, yields in pounds, right? We got to feed the world, feed an ever-growing population. That's what agriculture is focused on. Let's produce more of everything. So we produce corn, we produce soybeans, we produce wheat. All of these as monocultures, right? We put livestock in confinement, no matter the species. That's an aerial photograph of a livestock feedlot. That looks really appetizing, doesn't it? These practices result in a loss of biodiversity. There's a good study that came out in Germany that shows over the past 25 years, they've lost 75% of their biodiversity. We're seeing the same thing in the United States. We're seeing the same thing. I have the good fortune, I travel extensively all over the world, and I see this everywhere I go, a real loss of biodiversity. This is a picture of one of my native pastures. My son, for 5 years, taught rangeland management at Bismarck State College. He brought his students out to that pasture, and in 2 hours, they collected over 140 different species of grasses, forbs, and legumes. That's tremendous diversity. Now, I will tell you that that's degraded probably from what it once was. Go back and read Lewis and Clark's journals. They took fantastic notes as far as the species of plants they saw. But my point is, here we are in agriculture producing monocultures, but that's not the way nature works. Nature works with diversity. This lack of diversity then has led to the destruction of our soil. Take a look at this photo. On the left, a farmer had a forested area. He cleared part of that forest, tilled it, monoculture soybeans for 17 years. That's the same soil. Which of those soils will infiltrate more water? Which has more biology in it? Which is going to produce healthier, more nutrient-dense food? If we look under a microscope, take a look at the difference, okay? The soil on the left is like marbles in a jar. It's aggregate. It's pore spaces. Biology lives in and on thin films of water between those soil aggregates. Yet look what we're doing in agriculture. We're out there tilling the fields. We're destroying the soil. Then we wonder why we can't infiltrate water. We wonder why we can't cycle nutrients. Lack of biodiversity leads to lower nutrient cycling. That in turn leads to what? Increased use of synthetic fertilizers. We put more and more fertility on. This increase in synthetic fertilizer spurs the decline of mycorrhizal fungi. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with mycorrhizal fungi, but mycorrhizal fungi are the streets and avenues of the soil. They transfer nutrients from throughout the soil profile. And they secrete a glue called glomalin, and it's that sticky glue that holds soil particles together and forms those soil aggregates. A soil aggregate will only last about 4 weeks, and then it's broken down by biology, and you have to build new ones. If you don't have biology in mycorrhizal fungi, you're not going to build soil aggregates. So that leads to a decline in soil biology. I took this photo just north of Fargo here a couple years ago. Look at that soybean field. 1/2 of an inch of rain did that. And they were pumping. They set up pumps to pump water out of that. What do you see as you go up and down the Red River Valley now? You see acre after acre after acre being tile drained, right? They put in this tile drainage to move the water. Okay? That just, in my mind, is just unacceptable. Instead, they should be focused on building soil aggregates to infiltrate water. In 1991, when my wife and I bought that ranch from her parents, we did some infiltration tests. We found out we could only infiltrate 1/2 of an inch of rainfall per hour. 2 years ago, I had a team of scientists on my ranch doing some very extensive soils work. And by using a dual head infiltrometer, which is a machine that equalizes barometric pressure and scientifically figures out how much water we can infiltrate, we can now infiltrate over 30 inches per hour, which means every raindrop that falls is going to soak into my soil, then move throughout the soil profile and be held there via the carbon. Bismarck, North Dakota has never, ever, not once recorded 30 inches of rainfall in a year. Okay? I can infiltrate that much in an hour. What would that mean to the city of Fargo if all the farms around it could infiltrate water like that? What would it mean to the amount of money that has to be spent for flood control, paying out insurances, damages, right? Okay? Yet I just shake my head. Here we have our state government trying to figure out how to divert the Red River around the cities. Shouldn't we be spending our time educating farmers and ranchers? Isn't that where the problem really lies? We've degraded the soils. If we did that, we wouldn't see this. And we see this all over the world. Wherever I go, we see a problem where we cannot infiltrate water anymore. And then we can't store it there because we don't have the carbon in the soil. Now, high synthetic fertilizer use aids the propagation of weeds. Most weeds are there to cycle nutrients. They show up because they're a symptom of a greater problem. If you have a field full of weeds, it's because of something you did, okay? Chances are you over-applied nitrogen. Increased number of weeds causes an increased use of herbicides, right? So we're spraying more and more herbicides going on the food that we eat. Many of these herbicides are chelators. Chelators bind metals, manganese, zinc, iron, copper. All these heavy metals are now bound because of the herbicide we applied, so they're not available to the plant. These micronutrients are what the plant needs to ward off diseases. So if all of a sudden our crops are getting diseases, what do we got to do? We got to go spray fungicides, right? And what is it fungicides do? Fungicides are detrimental, of course, to soil biology and mycorrhizal fungi. You see the hamster wheel we're on in the current production model? It makes no sense. No sense at all. Because plants are not healthy enough to ward off pests, we spray pesticides, right? Okay? Because we spray pesticides, we have a decline in insects, including pollinators. There's a real dearth going on here with honeybees. They call it colony collapse disorder. Now, it's due to our management practices that we're seeing a decline in these insects. These pollinators are critical for crop production. These pesticides also cause a decline in predators, the very predators that would eat the pests that we're trying to control. For every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 species that are beneficial. So here we are trying to kill a pest. Why don't we just provide the home and habitat for the beneficials and the predators? Doesn't make sense. What effect does the current production model have on our resources? There's a picture from Iowa in 2017. We shouldn't be seeing that in this day and age. That occurred in the 1930s, right? What have we really learned since then? Take a look at this. There's Colorado, April 1935. There's January 2014. Okay, what do you notice about that picture? Pardon me? Topsoil's been blown away, but what do you notice? There we go, bingo. Look at the color difference. That's organic matter. Back in 1935, we still had high levels of organic matter in those soils in Colorado. We no longer have that today. Very good observation. We see this over and over. This is a photo I had my son take. I was standing in a road ditch near my place. The neighbor had seeded his crop with tillage. We had 3 days of sustained winds over 50 miles an hour. Look at the topsoil he lost. The thickness of a sheet of paper, one sheet of paper, is the equivalent of 1 ton of topsoil per acre. How many tons of topsoil did he lose right there? Here I'm pointing to the top of wire on a 3-strand barbed wire fence. That's how much topsoil he lost. There's his wheat. Everything above where he seeded the wheat blew away. I'm thankful the wind was from the east and I live west of him because I was beneficiary of that. It's sad though. It's really sad. These soils end up in our watersheds. I fly a lot and take pictures like this all the time. We shouldn't see that. How many clear streams and rivers do you see? I've driven across the Red River enough to know it's not clear, is it? It should be running clear. And when you see those rivers dark colored like that, you know that the nutrients are going off the farm into the rivers. What's that doing for water quality? Every summer you read articles, hear it on the news about water quality issues, whether we're talking in the Great Lakes or in the Mississippi Delta or in the estuaries on the coast. That's all due to lack of proper management, lack of stewardship. The industrialized, commoditized, as I like to call it, production model is all about killing. You want to kill weeds, kill pests, kill fungus diseases, kill our soil, and kill our profitability. This is profitability, okay? That blue there is, the top of that would be the gross income minus expenses give you that little bit of green down below. That's how much profit there is in agriculture. Some years, none. This past year in Kansas, 84% of net farm income was due to government subsidies. Taxpayers should not be having to foot that bill, right? It shows you the sad state of affair the current production model is. But we're told that we have to feed the world, right? We have to focus on higher yields. But higher and higher yields lead to what? More and more subsidies, like I said. In 2020, over 50% of all net farm income in the United States was due to farm subsidies. Shouldn't be that way. Okay, whoops. The current world population is 7.2 billion people approximately. And we say we have to feed the world, but in 2019 we produced enough food to feed 10.2 billion people. Producing enough food to feed the world is not the problem. Now, there's problems with distribution and getting it into the hands of those who need it, right? But there's not an issue of producing enough food. That's not the problem. We're kidding ourselves if we think a growing population will cure low commodity prices. It's not going to do that. Go drive through any of our rural communities. What do you see? A lot of abandoned buildings and businesses, right? Growing population isn't going to save that. What has all this production done to the quality of the food that we produce? We produce plenty of food, but what about the quality? The nutrient density of our food has decreased anywhere from 15 to 65% in the last 50 years. These are not easy stats to come by because who's going to pay for that research, right? Take a look at this. This is some work by David Thomas. 27 kinds of vegetables. That's the percent decline in each of those micronutrients. It's pretty startling. How about meat? Look at the decline there. Look at iron. 54% decline. I thought people eat red meat to get iron. Not anymore. An individual today would have to consume twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, 4 times as many vegetables to get the same amount of minerals and trace elements that they would have in 1940. That's pretty alarming, right? The United States spends more on health care than any other country in the world, per capita. Yet look at this. The USA now ranks at the top or near the top. ADD, ADHD, cancers, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, osteoporosis, the list goes on and on. Why is that? I tell everybody shut their phone off, and then here I had it on. Shame, shame. That's just startling to me. And that, to me, this shows where the real crisis is. And think of it now with this COVID pandemic. How much of that is really due to a lack of a healthy gut microbiome and the food that we eat? This is Dr. Zach Bush. Dr. Zach Bush he's a board certified in 3 different principles. I've had the good fortune of getting to know him. He's attended some of our workshops. And Dr. Zach Bush says this: the best way to address this human health crisis is with nutrient-dense food. The only way to produce nutrient-dense food is with healthy soil. Masanabu, I really like this quote. Food and medicine are not 2 different things. They are the front and back of one body. Chemically grown vegetables may be eaten for food, but they cannot be used for medicine. I think there's a lot of truth in that statement. We need to change the way we're producing food. We need to start thinking of our food as preventative medicine. This is Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She's the lead scientist at MIT. She just wrote a new book called Toxic Legacy. It'll be released here the 1st of July. If you have an interest in listening to these people, go on the website understandingag.com, click on the resource link, and then past webinars. You can view all of our past webinars free of charge. We just had Dr. Seneff do a webinar on this past Thursday. I really believe that the ecological crisis we are having is a crisis of character. One cannot have ecological integrity without human integrity. I just do not understand how farmers and ranchers can go do the practices they do and then look consumers right in the eye. Part of that, though, to be honest with you, it's a lack of understanding. You don't know what you don't know. When I started farming and ranching many, many years ago, I didn't know what I know today. I didn't know how soils function. I didn't know about the nutrient cycle, the mineral cycle, the water cycle, the energy cycle. I wasn't taught these things at NDSU, okay? Plain and simple. It's not being taught. You have to learn it on your own. Our challenge then is to not only produce food that is free of chemicals, but to do it in a way that ensures it is both high in nutrient density while regenerating our resources. And this can be done, and it must be done. To do this, we must regenerate our ecosystems, and the way to do that is to work with nature instead of against her. So now getting back to my story. After those 4 years of crop failures, I spent a lot of time observing. I was fortunate. We had a couple thousand acres of a native prairie ecosystem, which to our knowledge had never been tilled. And I observed what was happening in that native prairie ecosystem. And what I come to the conclusion over a period of years, there's really 6 principles that are constant no matter where I travel in the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these 6 principles. Okay? And then I'll get back to them. So it gets back to this. You know, I showed you this quote by Don Campbell. I had to change the way I see things. So now today when I go visit with farmers and ranchers and consumers, this is what I talk about. I talk about how we all need to change the way we see things because we weren't brought up knowing and understanding these principles. We weren't brought up understanding that every decision we make, even if it's with our buying dollar, has multiple cascading compounding effects. We can make a positive influence on society. So the first principle is context. There's an ecological context. I tell people there's a reason bananas don't grow in North Dakota, right? They're not within our context. Here 2 years ago before the pandemic, I was up in Manning, Alberta. I don't know if you know where Manning, Alberta is. You fly into Edmonton, you drive for a day, you feel like you're at the top of the world. There's Manning, Alberta. And they were trying to grow soybeans. That's out of context. That's a cool season environment if there ever was one, okay? Yet they're trying to grow something out of context. I see this over and over again in agriculture. You know, I use myself as an example. For 26 years, I calved in February and March in North Dakota. That's out of context. The deer aren't dropping their fawns in February and March in North Dakota. Why would I calve at that time of the year? Now we calve in late May and June. Calving is a breeze. It's no work at all. Okay? You got to act in context. There's financial context. Every farm, ranch, family has a different financial context. I'm in a little different financial context now than I was at the end of those 4 years, okay? You have to take that into account. Community, who's involved in the operation? You know, it's your family, but what about the broader community? What are we doing for our societies, right? And then the last one, spiritual context. I wouldn't have made it through those 4 years if it wasn't for my faith. My wife and I, at times, were pretty tough. And, you know, we leaned on our faith really hard during those 4 years, and we still do to this day. I don't know how anybody could work with agriculture and not believe, because you're working with God's creation every day. We have to understand our context before any decision can be made. The context is different for each person, each family, each community. Second principle, least amount of mechanical and chemical disturbance possible. I showed my father-in-law out there disking, okay? Where in nature do you see copious amounts of tillage? Yes, there's ants and burrowing rodents, you know, but there's not the tillage like this. That's not the way to have a healthy soil ecosystem. We have to stop that. In my mind, tillage should be outlawed. It just is too destructive. Okay? My friend Ray Archuleta put this slide together, and I really liked it. He says, this soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. Right? What's covering that soil? What's protecting it from blowing away in the wind, from washing away? What's feeding that soil? There's no live plants to feed the life in that soil. It's evaporating moisture, and then we wonder why we have these extended droughts, right? And look at the soil temperatures. They get higher and higher. Bare soil, it's not uncommon. One of the things I carry with me when I consult is a thermometer. I can take a soil temperature underneath living cover. Then I can take one on bare ground. It's not uncommon for there to be 40 degrees difference. You're killing soil biology. You're shutting the plants down if soil temps get over 100 degrees. Then you see this poor soil structure. Now, I don't know how many of you have a garden, but how can you look at this picture and think it's okay to till a garden? If you're truly concerned about nutrient density of the vegetables and produce you're growing, why would you ever till a garden? That's absolutely the worst thing you could do for the nutrient density of those vegetables. Yet for years, I went out, I tilled a garden until I became educated. And now we haven't tilled the garden, in going on 30 years. Third principle, armor on the soil. Nature always tries to cover the soil. That's one of my native prairie pastures. How much bare soil do you see there? Right? None. It's covered. Okay, why when you rototill a garden do weeds come? Nature's trying to correct you. She's trying to cover the soil. She's trying to put a living root in the soil. Right? Yet what do we do in agriculture today? Bare soil, bare soil, bare soil, right? This is my friend Ray Archuleta. We're in the Central Valley of California. That's where most of our produce that we consume in the United States is grown. How healthy are those soils? Yeah. We've all tasted lettuce and spinach that's grown in Central Valley, right? It doesn't even taste like food, does it? This is a picture of my field when I'm done seeding. You see any bare soil there? It's protected. I'm protecting the soil. Here I am planting corn through that heavy residue. People say it can't be done. Sure it can. Today's equipment, it can be easily done. And we can do the same thing in our garden. You just slice a small trench, put your seeds in, the rest of the soil is protected. Principle number 4, diversity. I talked to you a little earlier about diversity. I'm going to show you some slides that really show you the power of diversity and the importance of it. This is Dr. Ademir Caligari. I heard him speak in 2006, and at that time I was planting 2- and 3-way cover crop species mixes, and Dr. Caligari in a presentation said, cover crops are meant to be seeded in multi-species combinations. I remember when he said that, I hit myself on the head and I said, Gabe, of course, that's how the native prairie is. It's very diverse. So at that time, I was on the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District Board of Directors. We had some plot land located a mile south of my ranch. Now the winter of 05-06 was very dry, a lot like this past winter, not a lot of snow, etc. So we went in there and we decided, okay, we'll test his hypothesis. We're going to seed these cover crops as monocultures, then we're going to seed them as a diverse mix. Now, from the time we seeded in May until the end of July, we had less than an inch of precip. That's what the monoculture turnips look like the end of July. There's the oilseed radish. On down the line you go till you get to the diverse cover crop. Figure that out, right? What are we doing in agriculture today? We're planting monocultures. Is that what nature wants? No, nature wants diversity. They clipped the above ground biomass and weighed it. We tripled or quadrupled biomass where we had diversity. Figure that out, okay? Dr. Chris Nichols, who's one of the world's foremost authorities in mycorrhizal fungi, said this. She said, not only do the fungi provide for the needs of one plant, but that fungal hyphae pipeline connect to multiple plants, thus supplying the nutrient and energy needs of both microorganisms and the plants. Nature is much, much more collaborative than she is competitive. Yet, why don't we see it that way? Take a look at this picture. That's some spring triticale. Looks pretty pathetic, right? You're not going to combine that, are you, Ed? There's not much there, is there? Okay, now look at this. That looks pretty good. Some might say it looks a little weedy, but look how healthy those plants look. The amazing thing was they were seeded on the same field, side by side, the same day. The only difference is one side's a monoculture, the other is a diverse mix. That's the only difference. Explain that. Yet are we doing that in agriculture today? Do we do that in our gardens? That's Dr. Yamili in the pink. She was responsible for this. That took place in southeastern Alberta, Canada. I saw that and I was just amazed. It's like, how can anyone not realize that monocultures are a detriment to soil health? Yet, what do we hear over and over and over again? You got to plant monocultures, right? So this is my ranch today. Because of the lessons learned, I no longer plant monocultures. In the upper left, that's oats with 3 types of clover growing underneath it. The lower left, that's corn, and I've got hairy vetch and clover growing in with the corn. Lower right, that's sunflowers, and there's 20 species of cover crops growing in that sunflower field. I can still combine my cash crop as a monoculture, but I've got all that diversity, adding all those benefits. Upper right, that's a diverse broadleaf forage crop. I grow polyculture cash crops. This is winter triticale, forage winter wheat, cereal rye, and hairy vetch growing together. They're all seeded together, harvested together. Here's my vegetables. We do about 15 acres of vegetables most years. That's sweet corn. But what you don't see between the sweet corn rows are rows of peas, then a row of beans, then squash, then pumpkins. There's diversity in there. So we can still easily pick one species, but I've got the benefits and the synergies that Dr. Nichols talked about. That just shows the peas and beans crawling up the corn stalks. Notice the armor on the soil surface. That's how come I can get by without using herbicides, because we have that armor protecting the soil. This is just diversity in the garden. I kind of call it just chaos, but it works, right? And we get a lot of production from it. We always plant a lot of flowering species for the bees, and then can sell bouquets if we'd like. Cover crops. We grow cash crops on the majority of our cropland acres, but we're going to grow cover crops also, either before the cash crop, along with it, or following the cash crop. It's that diversity then that builds healthy soils. We have not added 1 pound of any nutrients except what falls out of the back end of an animal since 2007. I haven't had to fertilize our crops at all. Yet we have yields that are they the highest in the county? No. Are they the most profitable in the county? Probably. Probably. Fifth principle, living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. We use cover crops to do this because it all begins with photosynthesis. How much sunlight's going to hit the soil in that picture there? The more sunlight I can collect, the more carbon compounds that plant is manufacturing through photosynthesis and then pumping into the soil. So when I talk to people about climate change, agriculture is the answer. Absolutely. It's a big, big part of the answer. We can mitigate climate change by keeping living plants on the soil as long as possible throughout the year, and then especially if we integrate livestock. Because that plant pumps those carbon compounds down into the soil where it's cycled, because biology will consume the carbon to fuel the plants. I really like this picture. That man is standing next to an intermediate wheatgrass plant. There was a lot of intermediate wheatgrass in the Red River Valley hundreds of years ago. Take a look at that extensive root system. Is it no wonder why we had healthy soils? We once had healthy soils here. Soils here aren't very healthy anymore. We've lost about 75% of the carbon that was once in the soil. Photo was taken by Jim Richardson, who used to be at NDSU. Gentleman on the left is Dr. John Norman. Dr. John Norman is one of the world's premier soil scientists. I had the good fortune, he came out and spent quite a few days over a 2-year period on my ranch. Whoops. Okay. Could you advance, please? My battery must have went dead. Sorry about that, John. There we go. So he pulled over 300 soil cores 4 feet deep from our ranch. Next, please. And here's what he found. Whoops. He went down 48 inches, and he found that we have an average of 92 tons of carbon now per acre, which is equivalent to 60,400 tons of thermal coal. Soil was well aggregated down to 4 feet. That's how I can infiltrate 30-plus inches of rainfall per hour. Our A-horizon topsoil, it was once 5 inches. Now we have it as deep as 29 inches. You grow topsoil. That's how we produce healthy food. Next, please. Sixth principle, final one's animal integration. The soil is a living, breathing, subaquatic ecosystem. That's a water bear. There's more microorganisms in a teaspoonful of healthy soil than there are people on this planet. Yet how many of us think about that every time we take a step? Do you know the billions of critters we're stepping on? How many farmers or gardeners think about feeding that soil life? That's the thing I think about foremost on my ranch. How do I take care of the soil because it's going to take care of me? It's about feeding all life. Insects. I talked to you about the wide array of insects. There's a Phacelia and a native pollinator. Next, please. There's lady beetles. They're ferocious predators. Why don't I need to use insecticides? It's because I have the predator insects. As I said, 1,700 beneficial species for every one pest. My son took this photo in one of our pastures. How many flies are going to make it through that maze? We don't have to put insecticide on our livestock. The orb weavers take care of them for us. Bees. We have an agreement with the local apiary. They bring bees out, and then we have first right to buy the honey off those hives on our land. The apiary will tell you, he's been on our place for 5 years now, he's averaging at least 20% higher production on the hives that are on our land compared to the other hives. So he'll bring as many hives as he can onto our property, and we gladly let him because it's to our benefit also. We raise grass-fed and grass-finished beef. We finish a lot of those on cover crops. And to show you what some of our beef looks like, that'll make me hungry anyway. Now, we're doing nutrient testing on that. And Dr. David Montgomery, who wrote the book Dirt, Erosion of Civilizations, he's wrote several books. His new one, which will be out this fall, is called You Are What Your Food Ate. He did some testing, and he found that our grass-finished beef tested higher in omega-3s than 48 of the 56 most commonly sold fish fillets, including wild salmon. We've got an omega-6 to 3 ratio of 1.3 to 1. Okay? Now, to put that in perspective, does anyone know what the average omega-6 to 3 ratio standard population of the U.S. is right now? It should be less than 3 to 1. It's about 20 to 1 now. Okay? That's just out of whack. If you're eating beef that's finished with distiller's grain, which a lot of it is, 55 to 1. Why would you want to do that to yourself? If you're eating grain-finished beef, I don't want to bash producers who produce grain-fed beef, but you're going to be in the 10 to 15 to 1 range. Okay? Wild salmon is kind of the standard that everyone uses. We raise grass-finished lamb. We have a flock of ewes, and we raise grass-finished lamb. We raise pastured pork. We have about 400 pigs that are out free roaming. Our animals are not inside at any time except for the hens in the winter. And we have about 1,500 land hens out on pasture. And if somebody would have told me 20 years ago I'd have 1,500 land hens, I would have never believed it, but they're a lot of fun. And they're free to roam. That's an egg mobile there. My son takes these old stock trailers and retrofits them, puts a mesh floor in them and a nest box, and there's a little door on the side. It opens when the sun comes up, closes at night. And we have guard dogs with them to protect them. Okay, if you watch the movie Kiss the Ground, you might remember that scene. I'll tell you a little history of that. So they were out filming, and we were filming the chickens, and they said, is there really a difference in the eggs? So I told them, when you go back to Bismarck in the evening, you go to the supermarket, buy any dozen eggs you want. So they bought a dozen eggs, so that on the left, that's free-range organic eggs, and on the right is ours. We stood there cracking eggs till they were done with their dozen, and they couldn't believe the difference. Now, ironic thing about that whole story, so film crew left. 3 years later, I get a call from the producer. He said, Gabe, we've done the pilots and the test runs by audience, That's the most liked picture in the whole film. So they flew a crew back out from LA, and we spent a day cracking eggs just to get that picture right there, which was fine. And yes, I did charge them for it. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. My point there is that there is a difference. This is Dr. Stefan Van Vliet. He's a researcher at Duke University Medical Center. The machine on the right is a mass spectrometer. That mass spectrometer can measure over 2,500 different phytonutrient compounds. And so we're working with him now with some of our clients. We're taking food, whether it be vegetables, fruits, grains, pastured proteins, that are grown in soils that have been under these regenerative practices, and comparing them to food grown in and on soils that are farmed more conventionally. The difference is just staggering. It's not just a little, it is a lot. And our goal is to take that information and bring it out to a wider audience within the medical community so that we can truly start thinking of food as health and food as preventative medicine. So it's 2,500 now he can measure. The thing about it, we're seeing more and more consumers demanding these nutrient-dense foods. And then most importantly, down below, there's large food companies that are now starting to realize that. Okay, and they're demanding that. Next slide, please. This just shows what we're seeing, what Dr. Van Vliet is seeing. So as we move down and have a lot of diversity and have armor on the soil and have healthier soil, we're seeing more of these phytochemicals, the terpenoids, phenols, carotenoids, tocopherols. That's what we're seeing, and it's those things that really drive human health. I've got another book here. I left a few copies if you're interested. This is a book by two doctors, What's Making Our Children Sick. And they talk about that, how we truly need to be sourcing food that was grown in healthy soils. Next slide, please. Grazing livestock on plant species that have diverse pastures concentrates a wider variety of these phytochemicals in the meat and milk. Okay, and it's those phytochemicals that we need to pay attention to. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an interesting study. Dr. Fred Provenza had this study in his book, Nourishment. They did this study in the 1930s in an orphanage, children aged 1 to 6. They offered them free choice, 4 fruit, 10 vegetable, 5 grains, 6 red meats, 1 white meat, 1 fish, bone marrow, bone jelly, sea salt, 4 drinks. And the children could pick what they wanted to eat. The amazing thing was no 2 children ever selected the same food, and no child ever selected the same food each day. Now think of this. This was back in the 1930s, so you know their drink choices were not Coke and Pepsi, right? They were healthy, real fruit juices, real milk, okay? The attending physicians deemed the children extremely healthy, both mentally and physically. Dr. Brenneman stated they were the finest specimens from both a physical and behavioral standpoint that he had ever seen. Yet many scientists do not believe that humans have nutritional wisdom. You know, I travel extensively. I'm on the road about 280 days every year. I take my own food with me because I really believe it is very, very difficult to get nutrient-dense food. Once your body tastes nutrient-dense food, you're not going to want to eat anything else, plain and simple, because your body knows it. I mentioned how there's companies that are seeking this out. I'm very fortunate. About 6 years ago, General Mills brought a contingency of brass from their corporate office to my ranch to spend a day and learn about regeneration. And now they've been extremely supportive. And we're working with them on a couple very large projects to educate farmers and ranchers. When you go to General Mills corporate headquarters in Minneapolis, you park in their parking lot, and as you walk up to the main building on campus, they have cover crops planted along the walkway. And they have signs with what each of those cover crops are. You walk in the main door and painted on the wall, it says, regenerative agriculture is our future. There's companies like this who really believe it, and we're seeing that more and more. I have the good fortune that I'm in contact with many of them often, and to see this change, it's really a good thing. Yes, I know that those companies, they're publicly traded, they're going to do it for the profit, but their marketing studies are showing this is what consumers want. And so my business, we had to think about, okay, do we want to form an association with them? But we're going to drive change faster in this world with them than without them. So because of that, we say we'll educate anyone who wants to listen. We'll talk to them about regenerative ag. But it's really good for me to see the change happening worldwide. So this is what we do on our ranch. We take soil, water, sunlight. Everything revolves around carbon. We grow cash crops, cover crops, and all those different enterprises. And then we convert them to dollars by selling them directly to consumers. What does that lead to? In my left hand there, that's my soil today, and my right hand is just across the fence. I'll put it that way. And that isn't poor soil. That producer is no-tilling, and he has some diversity in the crop rotation. But it is the standard production model. When I started back in 1994 no-tilling, my soils look worse than that on the right there. So when I talk to farmers and ranchers or gardeners, and I hear over and over again, but Gabe, you don't understand. My soils aren't like that. And I say, but you don't understand. Mine weren't like that always either. You know? You can change. You just need to go look in the mirror and realize you are what can make that change happen. Our ranch is now profitable every year. Okay, next. And I'm proud to say I do this without any government subsidies of any kind. We refuse to take any government support. Why should my business rely on each one of your tax dollars? No, if I can't make it on my own, I shouldn't be in business. Plain and simple, right? Yes, we can feed the world with nutrient-dense food while regenerating our resources. If we do that, we're going to heal farms, families, and communities. And, next slide, please. This is what I think, in summing it up, this is a statement that I think really sums up what we need to do as a society. Because who could argue with that? I testified in front of the House Ag Committee back in February, and it was extremely frustrating to me. Because both sides of the aisle, all they wanted to do was argue. And I'm saying to them, we all want the same thing, right? We want stable families living peaceful lives in prosperity and physical security while free to pursue our own religious beliefs. All should enjoy adequate, nutritious food, clean water, while enjoying good education and health in balanced lives with time for family, friends, and community. All to be ensured for generations to come on a foundation of regenerative living soils and biologically diverse communities on Earth's lands, her rivers, lakes, and oceans. And I told the House Ag Committee, how can anyone argue with that? They're so stuck in gridlock, why can't we come together for the 80% of the things we agree on? This isn't rocket science. This is simply taking time-tested ecological principles to benefit all of us as society. So, with that, questions?
Wow. Awesome. That was incredible. I have not had the chance to hear you speak in person before, Gabe. As Mike's mentioned, I'm Megan Meerdahl. I'm one of the founders of Food of the North. I first heard Gabe's name mentioned in 2010 I was a new extension agent with Burleigh County Extension and heard about this farmer rancher in the county who was doing very different practices, was how it was referred to me at that time. And over the years, learned more about Gabe and the work he was doing, and then got better acquainted with it when they joined the Red River Market here in Fargo. If some of people have seen Nourished by Nature selling their products there. But really amazing stuff that you're doing, and I'm sure everybody here has lots of questions. So I get the honor of moderating today's Q&A. So I will just start with a question, and then if anybody wants to raise their hands, Mike's going to run around with the microphone.
Yeah, and I think what I'll do is if you think you have a question, why don't you just line up over in that aisle, and you guys can just pass this mic around.
Perfect.
It'll work better that way, I think.
Perfect. But kind of to get started, seeing what you have and showing those side-by-side photos of your farm versus what's happening on the neighboring farms, do you get a lot of your ranchers in your area and people coming to you wanting to learn more about your practices and philosophies, or are you just the different farmer?
Yeah, and some of each realize, farmers, ranchers, as a rule, are pretty stubborn people, wouldn't you say so, Ed? Right? And so a lot of neighbors don't want to believe that somebody who grew up in the city may understand some things better than they do. In saying that, back in 1994 when I bought that no-till drill, we were the first 100% no-tillers in the county. Now Burleigh County, North Dakota, as you know, is about 80% no-till, so that's been adopted widely. Cover crops, some, okay? There are a few people who are getting as crazy as we are with multi-species and that, but I tell people it's got to be for your context, though. So I don't want everyone to mimic what we're doing. I just want them to practice and apply the principles for the betterment of not only their farm and family, but the community.
And kind of going off of that, these rugged, independent farmers, as we know they are, do you have some examples of people in our region that have seen what you're doing and are a lot?
Many
Good.
examples, yeah. And if you go on our Understanding Ag website, we actually list some case studies there of people we've worked with around the country and that. But there's people literally doing it everywhere all over the world. Just few have as big a mouth as I do.
And very well spoken, too. Are you in line to, right there.
I don't have to turn it on, but, well, that's an incredible presentation, Dave. I probably getting too old, and I wish I would have had my son and all of my neighbors come in here and their families and all that, because this is a very, very good presentation. I just got done spraying 155 acres of corn this morning, and my agronomist is quite young, out of NDSU. He's pushing me really, really, really hard all the time, and I'm 80 years old, and I can't hardly keep up with him. But his thoughts and ideas are not quite like this presentation is. I favor this presentation more so than him. But anyway, he's a good buddy of mine, takes me golfing once in a while. So why aren't the colleges kind of pursuing this to a better degree?
So in my day job, I work for NDSU Agriculture. I support the university on the foundation side, and it's a multi-pronged issue. There's a lot of private investment that comes into our university systems from the agriculture industry. We have seen a decline in state and public dollars funding research and education, and so our higher education institutions have become very reliant on industry dollars. And so there's a lot of that that gets incorporated into our educational system today.
Yeah, she said it politely. I'll say it maybe a little more blunt. So think of it this way, Ed. What business could benefit the most if we taught farmers these practices? It's not going to be the fertilizer industry. It's not going to be the chemical industry. Realize I gave a very abbreviated version today, okay? But I can get into, for instance, seed and how seed really works. There's a cycle called rhizology where out root exudates to attract biology to cycle specific nutrients. That biology then enters into the plant. It's a cycle known as rhizophagy. Okay, once it's in the plant, there's a reactive process that strips the nutrients from that biology. Then it expels the biology out to go gather more. Now, if that isn't mind-blowing enough, during the reproductive phase of a plant, Dr. James White, Rutgers University, discovered that plant has the ability to take that biology up onto the seed. So when that seed is dispersed, the biology is there to start the cycle over again. Yeah, what do we learn? What are we told by seed salesmen? Right? You got to buy all this treated seed, right? Otherwise, the bugs are going to eat your seed. I haven't used any insecticide for years and years. No reason. But the seed companies aren't going to promote this, right? So understand what I'm saying? And I'm not blaming, I understand that's what it is. Oops. Okay. I'm not saying that what they're doing is wrong, but I'm saying what they're doing is not educating farmers and ranchers as they need to be educated. The other thing, you talk about fertilizer, okay? One of the interesting things we're doing, and realize we're consulting on over 22 million acres across North America now. That's a lot of acres. The first thing we do is do proper soil testing. 95+% of soil tests taken today are pretty meaningless because they only look at the inorganic fraction of nutrients. They're not looking at the organic fraction. So we do a Haney soil test. We do a phospholipid fatty acid that tells us about the biology you have, because biology is needed to cycle nutrients, whether it be in your garden or in a crop field. Then we do what's called a total nutrient digestion test. And you'll find this really interesting. We did this across 45 farms, North Dakota, Manitoba, Saskatchewan this past year. Top 12 inches of the soil profile. How many pounds of nitrogen do you think was the average of those 45 farms? 9,000 pounds of nitrogen are in the soil. 2,300 pounds of phosphorus, 11,000 pounds of potassium. Yeah, what's your young agronomist saying? You better put on fertilizer, right? We have plenty of fertilizer. It's not a shortage of nutrients, right? It's a shortage of biology. Mm-hmm. And we educate farmers, how do you get the biology to make those nutrients available? We have plenty of nutrients. That's why I said on our ranch, we have applied 0 pounds since 2007. Yet, still produce healthy crops every year. Okay, a slow process? Is that what you said?
No, slower process of getting people educated.
Yeah.
It's kind of a slow process, see, so.
Yep.
You know, this thing is kind of, as I see it, I've been kind of not doing anything to your extent, but I've been kind of working on this for 40 years, mostly through our cattle operation and cover crops and stuff like that.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I'm here today. And it's not just me. There's hundreds and thousands of others like me all over the world that are doing what they can to educate. And my hope being here today is that you listening will take it upon yourselves to educate yourselves and educate others as to how these cycles function and how you can make a difference.
So kind of going off of that, the comment that he made about this kind of being a slow process with educating folks, do you think the emphasis on carbon capturing right now is going to move the needle with some folks to move into your philosophy and realm of farming?
Yes, and realize our group, we are on Secretary Vilsack's Regenerative Agriculture team, and I worry a lot about that because carbon drives farm profit. The more carbon you have in your soils and that, the more nutrient cycling, the more water you can hold and store to make you resilient, it benefits farm profit. I worry about it getting greenwashed, okay? And here's why. One of our technical advisors, Dr. Jason Roundtree, Michigan State University, he's probably the nation's foremost expert on carbon capture and regenerative systems. and the technology is not there to accurately measure it. We spent $170,000 to measure carbon on 600 acres of my farmland. What we found at the end of 3 years, data is incomplete because I'm storing carbon deeper than 4 feet. What we're telling our clients is don't sign on the line because the technology is not there to accurately measure. Let's face it, the current administration is going to push some type of carbon market forward. My fear is it'll all be greenwash, though, and it won't be accurate. You know, there's companies out there right now that are touting they're trying to buy carbon, et cetera, but they're only measuring 3 to 5% of the farms, and they're only measuring them to a meter deep. That's not near enough. It's not accurate enough. Farmers and ranchers need to be paid for what it truly is. The only carbon market out there right now is the California cap and trade, which is paying about $15 a metric CO2 ton equivalent. Dr. Rattan Lal at Ohio State says it should be in the $100 to $120 a ton range.
Oh, wow.
Okay, on my soils, best as Dr. Norman can estimate, I've stored between 325 and 525 metric tons of CO2 per acre. So do the math on that. That's pretty lucrative then, right? But I would not want to sign a contract right now. Yes.
Awesome. Kurt?
Megan, you took my first question, so I have one second. Well, I guess first of all, it's really inspiring to see so many people here listening on a beautiful Sunday afternoon to listen about soil and dirt. So I think it's really great. My question to you is, and I've heard the answer from your son Paul, because I've been out to visit your ranch. It's really interesting and eye-opening. But I was hoping you could elaborate on why you don't go organic.
Yeah.
And the difference between what you're doing is and
Yep.
what organic is.
Yep. Okay, thank you for that question. Excellent question. And I often get asked that, Gabe, okay, why isn't Brown's Ranch certified organic? My answer to that is, what would I gain by doing so? To our knowledge, we have never, ever, not once lost a single customer because we were not certified organic. The prices we are receiving are, for the most part, higher than organic prices. So what benefit is there? To me, the validation should be between us and our customers. We have an open door policy on our ranch. Anyone can drive on our ranch at any time and look at anything outside of the house. My wife made me say that one. You know? Yeah, she's afraid she has to keep the house always clean. Okay? Most summers we'll get 2,500 people through the yard there. Okay? We're not going to do anything that jeopardizes the trust between our customers and us. In saying that, it would be very easy for us to be certified organic. We could be. But I want to show people, okay, organic is about 3% of the farms out there are certified organic. I want to show the other 97%, hey, you can get there without all this, okay? And let's face it, it is easier to transition using some of those tools, okay? If they have to use a herbicide to move them down that path, I don't want them thrown out of an organic and not trying to focus on regenerating their soils. So that's the reason.
Oh, yeah, right here.
Yes?
If I remember correctly, you said that you had about 6,000 acres
Yeah.
of land that you're using for production.
Yep.
And I saw you've got cattle, you've got beef cattle, cow calf, you've got hogs, you've got sheep, and God bless you, you've got chickens.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
And I didn't even tell you the broilers and the turkeys and everything else. But, yeah.
Plus you've got a consulting business. Could you describe your operation? You must have a lot of hired help.
Yeah, so
Describe your operation a little bit.
sure. So I want you to think of it this way. So first I will tell you, okay, here is the labor on our ranch, okay? It's my 33-year-old son. He has one female employee who helps with the marketing. He has one part-time employee doing ranch labor. My wife cleans the eggs and does the bookwork. That's all the labor on our ranch. Now think of all the things we don't do. I don't have to go buy fertilizer. I don't have to go buy chemical. I don't have to spray. I don't do tillage. My son will tell you that one of his biggest expenses now is he wears out 2 recliners in the winter because Our cattle are out grazing during the winter. This past winter, we fed hay 18 days is all. The livestock are out grazing, the sheep are out grazing. Yes, you got to feed the hogs during the winter. They're more in a lot, but they're outside. The laying hens are in a hoop house. Our broilers and turkeys are seasonal. We don't produce them during the winter, okay? The bees, I told you about them. The apiary owns them, okay? The cash crops, I'm in charge of that, so I'll seed the cash crops and I hire the combining done, okay? It really isn't that difficult. You know, the cows calve by themselves. If they can't calve by themselves, they shouldn't be a cow in our herd, so, right?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I was thinking the same thing too.
And
You
many
must work
people
all
think
the
that.
time.
Now, in all honesty, we are way too large. We don't need that many acres. My son and I did a little exercise one day where we sat down and figured out how many acres would it take in south central North Dakota to support a family. The answer we came up with was we could do it on 20 acres. We would prefer 160, because with 160 you could have a few more beef animals and sheep. But it really doesn't take that much, okay? Why we have so much land, because it's in the family. Part of it's owned, and then my sister-in-law's owned some land, and I've been renting land from some neighbors for years, and so we just do it. Now, we do allow Paul's one part-time hired man has a herd of cattle that we allow him to run on our place, too. Yep.
Yeah, right there. Oh, sorry. I apologize.
Chris Nichols, no, she moved from Mandan, and she actually from Mandan, she went out to Rodale Institute for a short time, and she is now in Arizona. And she's one of the technical advisors on our Understanding Ag team. Yes. Wonderful individual.
Yeah, I've met her a long time. You know Dr. Bill Jackson?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, I've got a couple of little books all about farming. So they're about 1,000 pages apiece.
Wow.
Little.
About 15 years ago, trying to do the same thing you're talking about. I found out Monsanto had more money than I did.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a tough sell-out.
Yep. Now, since you brought up Monsanto, okay, I often get asked, Gabe, do you get a lot of static from these companies? Last week, I had a Zoom meeting with the board of directors and the scientific team from Syngenta, okay? I would have never thought. And I was kind of nervous about doing it, but I will do meetings with anyone if they're interested. To their credit, they're trying to figure out how they can enter the regenerative ag space. So the final question they asked me, they said, Gabe, what can we do? Well, I was prepared. I had my little jar of neonicotinoid-treated soybean seed, and I simply told them, you got to cut this out. You know, there's enough neonicotinoids in 1 pint of treated soybean seed to kill 72 million bees. We can't be farming that way anymore. And I told them that. To their credit, and I thought, okay, that's it. They won't done with me. Hour and a half later, they emailed me, and we've had several calls since. So it's a good thing.
Well, then your comments about Glenalum, that's when I started working with Chris on that.
Really? And your name is?
Phil Melrose,
Okay.
maybe you've heard of that.
Yep, I have. That's great.
Yeah, I worked with the North London. We did some carbon sequestration, and that's what I was wondering. They talked about carbon sequestration, but how are they going to measure it?
Yep.
That's the problem.
And that's the big issue. How are you going to measure it? It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it's got to be more accurate than they can at this point in time.
If I can remember, I will give you some figures from Dr. Hill. Every gram of soil was 300,000 alligator, 1 million fungi, 20 million bacteria, and 4 billion bacteria.
Yep.
That's in a gram, which is the figure.
Yep. It's amazing, isn't it?
That is. Did we
Yeah.
have one right up here?
Yes.
Sure it does.
Thanks, Gabe. Great presentation. You talk about all the production increases that you're seeing with your land, even without the carbon credits and without the subsidies. Is this something that people could go out? I mean, you could. Sounds like start a business buying farmland and
Yep.
converting it to regenerative.
Yep. Okay. Couple things, point of clarity. When I talk about increases of production, yes, I've been able to significantly increase carrying capacity of the pastures. I am not out trying to increase yields because I honestly believe God made every ecosystem to produce so much. You know, near Bismarck, we're in a more brittle environment than here around Fargo. You know, you'll probably get, 8 inches more precip a year. That's a significant difference. I have to keep it in my context. I should not be trying to outproduce my environment. So my production isn't higher, but my profitability is considerably higher. And as a farmer rancher, I'll take profit over yield any day because profit will keep me in business. Yeah, and so can you? Yes. We're working with several funds that are doing just that. They're out trying to acquire ag land and regenerate it as an income stream. Yep, it's happening.
Do we have one back there? Perfect.
So you mentioned that you had hail 4 years in a row. The first part of my question is I just wanted to ask you, what do you do to counteract, and how does your method of farming fix those issues?
Yep.
Or what do you have to build resiliency against that?
Yep. Great question. At that time, I said I didn't take hail insurance because it just didn't hail enough there. Well, I learned otherwise in a hurry. Then I did take hail insurance for a period of years as I was getting back on my feet when I had to borrow money. But as soon as I no longer had to borrow money from the bank, I dropped that because I just more or less self-insure. So think of it this way. With knowing the species of livestock I have, what would you do if I get a hailstorm now? Okay, out go the hogs, out go the chickens, out go the turkeys. You know, my livestock can glean a hailed out crop and at least get me my cost of production back. So to me, they're my insurance policy.
Then the second part of my question, which is also weather related, what type of techniques do you use to help your crop or help your cattle and livestock through adverse conditions during the winter?
Yeah, so you have to, it's not the cold that'll bother them, it's the wind chill. So what we do is our cattle are out grazing, but we have some portable windbreaks we'll set out there so they can get behind those windbreaks during the winter, both the cattle and sheep that are out grazing. Yep, and they do fine. Interestingly enough, one of our consultants, Alejandro Carrillo, he ranches in the Chihuahuan Desert. And he's got 30,000 acres, and it's amazing. I've been there. You drive through this desert, and there is if you want to watch his webinar, go on our UA website, past webinars. You drive through this desert for hundreds of miles, and all of a sudden you come to this gate, and you open it, and you go from bare ground to grass knee to waist high. And it's like, what changed? The only thing that changed is the management. His neighbors, it takes 300 acres to run a cow-calf pair. It takes Alejandro 30 to run a cow-calf pair for the year. He just changed his management. Now we hired Alejandro. He's part of our consulting team, and he is sending us photos, satellite imagery, where now he's getting rain clouds forming over his ranch in the desert because he has enough green. You know, if you look back, you know, read the Bible, okay? Was the Middle East the desert it is today? Was the Sahara Desert the desert it is today? Was the southwestern U.S. and Mexico the desert it is today? No, it was all once vast grasslands. Our management did that, okay? But we can regenerate it also. And that's what we need to do.
Back there?
Yes?
You talked about some of the food products that we are eating have been analyzed for the amount of nutrient they are carrying in the new system of growing.
Mm-hmm.
Has anything been done to analyze the grain that's coming off the no-till fields in our areas?
Okay, we are doing that. Okay, the question was the phytonutrients that are being analyzed. Are we analyzing the grain that's coming off no-till fields? Yes, we're starting to collaborate on that data. What we're doing is we're collecting, and Dr. David Montgomery last year, we went on farms throughout the U.S. We grew the same grain on, say, for instance, my farm, and then my neighbor, in cooperation with them, they grew the same grain, and we analyzed the nutrient density. Some of that information will be available in his book that's coming out this fall, You Are What Your Food Ate. Okay? So it's being done, but it's not, that's very expensive testing, and unfortunately, we don't have an unlimited pocketbook to do that.
Right here.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And also for the book. I've read the book. It's really good.
Thank you.
Could you describe, this is probably a simple question, how to integrate cover crops into a soybean field?
Yep.
I
Yep.
appreciate that.
So we work with a lot of corn bean growers, and face it, a lot of the I states are all corn and beans. Even here, number one soybean county in the U.S. is Cass County, North Dakota. Okay, what we're doing is you will plant cereal rye the fall before, and then that cereal rye, being a fall biennial, it'll start growing in the fall, but it'll grow the next spring. Okay, what that cereal rye is doing is it's cycling all that excess nitrogen in the soil, and it's pulling it up into its plant. Then, while the cereal rye is still alive, we'll go in there and we will plant soybeans into that. Then we will roll the cereal rye down, and that's the armor that covers the soil. So obviously soybeans, they can have pods only 4 inches off the soil. You're not going to have a living cover in a soybean crop. So it's the cereal rye right before that's the living cover. Yep.
Interesting.
Thank you so much, Gabe,
Yep.
for your presentation. And Megan, thanks so much for moderating.
Yep.
And I just wanted to mention for those in the audience, if you know people that you think would like to see this presentation, it is being recorded, and it's going to be on our St. John Live website. If
Good.
you need help finding that, just let us know. We'll be happy to get you directed to that.
Thank you.
And I had a question that I think could be directed towards both of you. So those of us who are looking at this from the consumer point of view, could you give us some tips? How do we find kinds of outlets for these kinds of foods coming out of regenerative ag?
That's right up your alley.
It was one of my questions for you as well. Of course, there's a lot of great changes that are now starting to take place in our food system, seemingly on a faster and faster scale, which is exciting. We have a very vibrant farmers market in our community, and that's a growing trend across the country. I think a really exciting thing is seeing the push that's coming from those major companies like you shared, the General Mills, the Unilevers, who are emphasizing procuring ingredients from those places. So, we vote with our dollars, right? And that's really, I feel like that gets overshared, but I think it gets overshared because it's really one of the most impactful things that we can do.
She absolutely right. What I encourage all consumers to do is get to know your farmer, get to know your rancher in your local community, and go visit with them. Find out, your own health is at stake. Find out how they grow and raise their food, what production practices they use, and then buy accordingly. And I know some people say, yeah, but your products are very expensive. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a capitalist, okay? I was pretty broke at one time. I'm not going to make excuses because I can sell our products for what I can. In saying that, our cost of production, as more and more people do this, the prices will come down, and we know that. And I don't want to make it seem like it's all about money, but yet, it's a capitalistic economy, and it's supply and demand. So I'm not going to stand and apologize for selling products the way I do. I'll just relate this one story. So my son and I were at the farmer's market in Bismarck, and this gentleman walks up to our concession trailer, and he's looking the price list over, and he says, "Man, your products are expensive." And before we could say anything, the gentleman behind him said, "Excuse me, I just had triple bypass. You think this is expensive? Try paying for that." And I said, "Thank you."
Absolutely.
I thought that was a pretty good testimonial.
I think a lot of us were really excited to watch Kiss the Ground, and see your involvement in that. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that came to be?
Oh, sure, I can do that. So that started actually over 7 years ago. Ray Archuleta, Ray the soil guy, he's now one of my business partners with Understanding Ag. He called me one evening and said, Gabe, I was just contacted by this producer, Josh Tickell, who's making this movie, and he wants to follow me around. And he said, I told Josh, the only way I'll do it is if he also goes to your ranch, okay? Because if you know the story about Ray, Ray worked for NRCS for 30 years, and in 2007, he was at my ranch. I opened it up for an NRCS training, and they flew people in from all over the country, employees, and Ray stood listening to what I was saying, and, you know, the wires crossed in his head, and he became Ray the soil guy and spent the rest of his life teaching that. And Ray and I had a vision, once Ray retired from NRCS, we'd start a consulting company, and then we have a 501c3 nonprofit called Soil Health Academy. Well, Josh went and spent a few days with Ray, and then he flew up to my ranch, and the movie Kiss the Ground was originally going to be about organic farming. But we showed Josh that, no, it's got to be about the soil, and it's got to be about nutrient-dense food and health. And so Josh, the movie changed dramatically once he was at my ranch, and then it went down more of the path that the final cut was. The issue was that the funders, okay, they didn't want anything with livestock in the movie. The livestock are a dirty word to some of those people. And I showed them, you know, on our ranch that livestock are essential for truly healthy soil. And, you know, it was the grazing bison that made these soils in the Red River Valley what they once were, okay? Now, I don't think I shared this with the whole group, but since that movie came out, one of my clients, he's funding another movie. It's going to be called Common Ground, and this one's going to take it to a new level, and it'll be pretty exciting. It's going to just call out the current ag system for what it is, but it's going to be more a movie of hope. We've got a lot of our clients on there who were struggling financially, and now they've gone down the regenerative path, and it's about their stories. So we're looking forward to that one.
Awesome. I think we have just a little bit more
There's a
time.
question over here.
There's any more questions?
A little bit about how can they do this without the livestock?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we can do it without livestock. We work with hundreds of producers who do not have livestock, have no desire to. We can do it. You do the same principles just without livestock. Realize that you can still regenerate soils. They will never quite get to the point they could with livestock. Because for every cow that's out there on an acre of land, you're cycling about 0.15 pounds of nitrogen, okay, 0.25 pounds of phosphorus, and 0.5 pounds of potassium every day. Okay, so they're cycling a lot of nutrients, plus the biology and the microbe of a rumen is closely related to that in the soil. So you can still do it without livestock, just you'll never quite get to the same point. Yep.
Any other? We've got one right up here.
So when you made your switch to no-till, did you start then, did you do natural right away, or did
Okay.
you still use
The question was, when I made my switch, how much did I switch right away? Okay, realize my bank, after those 4 years, I couldn't borrow money anymore. I was just thankful they didn't foreclose on me. So I didn't have the money to buy fertilizers or that, so I didn't use any. Okay, I still use some chemical. Okay, I never did use insecticides or that, so I didn't use any of that. I started keeping my own seed. Realize I had to learn all this over time. I tell people, I had to go to the library, and with the Dewey Decimal System, because there was no internet back then, I had to look up Thomas Jefferson, and I read about what he was doing on his plantation Monticello back when he was farming without. I'll tell you a story about that. So I was reading in his journals that he was using vetches and clover and turnips, and I got thinking, I can do that. So I'll never forget walking into the local co-op, and I asked for 50 pounds of turnip seed. Well, they were trying to figure out how many of those little packets it'd take to make 50 pounds, you know. They never knew, you know, they didn't sell cover crops. So it was a slow process. Then once I started making money, I started using fertilizer again. I fell into that trap for a bit. Then Dr. Nichols in 2004 came to my ranch. She said, Gabe, you got to quit the fertility out. You're the synthetic fertility. Your soil, you're holding it back by applying those things. So she taught me. So then I did split trials, and that's when we dropped all synthetics in 08. 07 was the last year. Yep. So I tell people, I got to learn everything the hard way, usually twice. But then I kind of get it, you know.
Looks like we have one in the back over there.
Hi. So I watched the documentary and had a few questions.
Yep.
Well, narrowed down to the two most important ones. Could you describe the microclimate on your farm? And the next question, which would be part of that, would be, I'm hearing on the news that there's a lot of drought going on. Farmers are having a hard time. What is the current state of your farm?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. So the first was, what's the microclimate on our farm? Okay, our ranch is, if you drive into Bismarck on I-94, you know, the rest areas east of Minokan, we're a mile west of that. There's all these tree rows. There's a rock painted with the smiley face. North side of the highway, that's our ranch. Okay, we're in city jurisdiction. One of the things we're seeing in the 35 plus years I've been on that ranch is we're seeing negative effects from the latent heat of the city of Bismarck. If you will watch the rain patterns now, and you can find this over every major city wherever you got a lot of cement and buildings, the heat that comes off that actually pushes up, and the rain clouds will split and go around. So I've had to deal with less and less moisture every year, okay? In saying that, though, we're entering our 6th year of extremely dry. Last year was the 2nd driest year ever recorded, the city of Bismarck. This year is the driest ever recorded. We're still running the same number of livestock that we did 6 years ago. Okay, why? Because our soils, every raindrop that falls goes in. Okay, I can grow more on less. Now, I'll be honest, this year, if it doesn't rain pretty quick, we're going to start liquidating some animals because that's just good business. Okay? Whereas my neighbors, they've already sold most of their livestock. They sold them years ago, several years ago. Most of my neighbors no longer have livestock. And if you look at my neighbors' pastures now, I mean, it's like a golf course. Whereas ours, we probably got grass 12 to 18 inches tall, even though we've had very little moisture. I will tell you this much, because things change when you have a healthy soil, have the mycorrhizal fungi moving nutrients. I'll never forget, I mentioned Alejandro Carrillo in the Chihuahuan Desert. During that webinar, he was asked, Alejandro, how much moisture do you get? Well, he says, you know, we get 6 to 8 inches a year, but I really don't need that much. And I thought, wow. Okay, if he's saying that, I shouldn't be complaining about getting 10 to 12, right? So the soil just acts and functions a lot better when you have a healthy soil ecosystem. Yep.
Any other questions? It looks
There's
like we
one
have
here.
one up here.
I can repeat it too if you want.
Mike's getting his steps in today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious, now, when you're doing your cover crops, are you using the same perennial cover crops all the time, or do you rotate some out?
Yeah, so most of our, good question, most of our cover crops that we're seeding are annual cover crops, okay? And I tell people, think of it this way, okay? When the municipality builds a road, what's the first thing that grows in the ditch? It's your weeds, right? Your annual forbs. Then comes annual grasses. Then comes the perennials. So because I want annual crops, we're using annual cover crops. So I will grow them. They're terminated by a frost in the fall, okay? Then that's the residue that we seed into the next year. So you use your context to your advantage. If I was farming and ranching in the southern U.S., I would grow cover crops, then I'd roll them down to terminate them and then plant into them. Yep.
Mike?
I got a question. I have some friends here that are interested in the potential of hemp around the country, and
Yeah, I think there's good possibilities for hemp, but I equate it kind of to the ostrich emu business. You know, the infrastructure isn't there and the markets aren't there yet. We were contacted by a number of farmers who grew hemp and spent all that money, and it's not cheap to get into. Now they have no market for it. You got to establish the market first. Yep. So once the infrastructure gets there, I think that business will expand.
Do you think that'll happen?
I do think it will over time. We're going to have to. You know, there's all this talk, how do we feed the world, like I said in my presentation. Realize, okay, does anyone understand the corn crop in the U.S., how much goes for human consumption? 30, 35, 10? No, it's less than 7% goes for human consumption. And unfortunately, the largest part of that is high fructose corn syrup, unfortunately. Yeah, so what I'm saying is instead of growing corn, we need to be growing vegetables and fruits and, you know, this irrigated land, and you get into the I states, that needs to be in vegetable and true food production.
So I'll ask a question off of that. So one of the arguments I hear for this increasing yield is this idea of, as we're lifting more countries globally out of poverty, demand for animal protein is rising. So we need to continue this livestock production system that we have. What would be, you're completely counter to that. So what would be your...
No, I'm just a little different. I agree we need more livestock production, but it has to be out on the land. When an animal, a ruminant, grazes a plant, if you ever watch them, it doesn't matter whether we're talking bison or cattle, they rope that plant and then they tug on it and tear it off. Plants evolved over time. When they sense that happening, they start sloughing off root exudates into the soil to attract biology to regrow. The biology's got to bring them the nutrients, so they regrow. Pre-European settlement, there was, depending on where you read, about 75 million bison grazing North America, okay? Plus deer and elk and bighorn sheep and all these antelope, all these other species. That's more numbers than we have cattle now, okay? Cattle are often villainized for causing global warming, okay? No, we need to take the animals out of confinement, out of the feedlots, and get them grazing. One of my other business partners, Dr. Ellen Williams, did all the math. If we would take animals out of confinement and put them grazing, just that alone, the benefit to the soil, we can sequester over half of the annual CO2 emissions just from that one act. So it's not that we need more cattle, we just need them out on the landscape grazing. And then if we do away with the feedlot type production, for one thing, we're going to have a better omega-6, 3-profile fatty acids, human health factors in the beef, but then also we're not going to have all that grain production going to feed livestock that shouldn't be fed. Ruminants should not be fed grain. It's just, you know, that's not how they evolved.
So you kind of talked about that in the process of making this documentary, there was a group that was very anti-animal that pulled away from the film or had issue with the film with that. So in this quest that we're on to have a more regenerative, healthier planet and people, do you feel like the dual people that are in the anti-animal camp versus your camp that we're causing more issues, and how can we bring people
actually,
into
we're bridging. That's a great question. Actually, we're bridging them. Because it's not the cow, it's the how. It's how we're raising those livestock. And I'll get into one of the things on our farm, too, is quality of life for the animal. You know, my son often gets asked at the farmer's market, how do you treat your animals? And my son always answers, if I was an animal, I'd want to be raised on Brown's Ranch. Because they have a very good life. I tell people our animals have one great life, one bad moment. You know, that's plain and simple. But if you explain things to those people, I don't have any problem with a person being a vegetarian or vegan. That's their choice. That's individual freedom. But don't villainize a cow for something she doesn't have control of. We're the ones who are wrong putting her in confinement. I always tell people, if you think a cow or an animal wants to be in confinement, go open the gate. See where they will go. I'll guarantee you they're going to walk out of that gate, you know. They want to enjoy life, and we should allow them to.
Well, I know that we've got about 15 minutes left, and I know there's some folks that are probably going to want to chat with Gabe individually.
That's fine.
So what are kind of your parting thoughts for us? I know that not all of us are farmers, and we kind of talked about what folks can do as consumers, but what would be your charter for all of us as we go forward?
I really encourage you to just educate yourself and understand, you know, for your health, your children, your grandchildren, this makes a major difference. And, you know, the other thing is I really despise the word sustainable. Why do we want to sustain a degraded resource? We need to regenerate things. You know, just like we saw those soils being degraded, we can regenerate them. And what you do with your buying dollar, what you do with just talking to people about this, it absolutely amazes me now the number of calls I get from people who live in the city but want to do something. Grow your own vegetables, your own fruits. You know, enjoy that. I mean, come on. Do you really enjoy the taste of one of those supermarket tomatoes? Really? You know, enjoy just being a part of nature and educating others.
Awesome. Would you all please join me in thanking Gabe?
Thank you.